Hey everybody, it's Mr. Chris here. Just going to take you through your guys' lesson today for our section 2 notes. I hope this Screencastify recording stuff is kind of working. I know it's not ideal. If you're having trouble with stuff or you're getting stressed out or overwhelmed, please email me or post something on the stream. Just let me know and I'll be happy to reach out and help you guys. Um, Quick recap of things on our classroom right now, where we're at with chapter 17. If you guys haven't got done with your World War stuff, it is late. Late and done still equals points. Late and never done, not good. Okay, so I'm not going to open those up and put people on blast, but you guys know who you are. Your section 1 notes are right here. Your crash course yesterday was with your ed puzzle. I hope that made sense with how it was set up. It's exactly the same questions you would have seen had we done it in class. It's just I have it posted with that. Okay. Um, so today what we're going to do is go through. I have slides for you guys again for section 2. Uh, you're going to see posted with you guys, instead of slides to fill in, I have blanks here for you like we would be doing on our Google Docs. So it's not too long of a section. It looks a lot like this, and we're going to go through where my slides are going to coordinate with your blanks. Okay? That'll be your lesson for today whenever you're listening to this. Along with that, I'm going to attach your assignment to do is going to be an episode of Flocabulary. I'll attach the blank lyrics on there. You can watch that and fill those in. That'll be a quick and easy way to get you guys some points. Things to be looking out for in the next little while. We have 2 more sections of notes for this chapter, 3 and 4. We will have our next episode of the World Wars, which I think is really, really good. I think it's going to be able to give you guys a better explanation of how these dictators we talk about today rise to their positions of power, how they are chosen, and what they do with it. So just be on the lookout for those things. Also, I want to point out your chapter 17 vocab is on Quizlet. It is still there. We will probably be having a quiz in the next week or so. So that's on you guys to be looking at that 5, 10, 15 minutes a day. Okay? And I can't think of anything else, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, your guys' opening question for today. A government that aims to control the political, economic, social, intellectual, and cultural lives of its citizens is known as a what? Your answer is an awesome, pretty cool government, because I don't care about my intellectual, social, cultural, economic. Like, that's pretty much controlling everything. And once you spend more than a few seconds thinking about it, our answer kind of makes sense, because it is a totalitarian state. Again, breaking this word down for some of you guys who may not be as familiar with it, total. It has total control. They control your politics. It controls your economy. It controls your social lives, what you are and aren't allowed to do and say. Intellectual lives, what you learn, what you see, what you hear. And your cultural lives, how you dress, what you eat, where you go, who you associate with. And again, when we think totalitarian states, we jump down to some of the people we're going to talk about today and this week. Benito Mussolini of Italy, Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, and I can't remember what his name is. Yeah, it's Hitler, Adolf Hitler of the Nazi Party. All right, so your totalitarian state has total control. Schedule for this lesson and moving forward here, we're going to do our opening question. I'm going to post the new CNN 10 for you guys. I hope you guys are watching those to stay in touch with some things. You're going to have a current event coming up pretty soon here. It will be, if not your last one, your second to last one of the year. So we're almost done with those. We're going to watch, read, fill in our slides for section 2. And then, like I said, your Flocab is going to be posted with the lyrics to fill in. Okie dokie artichokes. Yep, that was a very dad thing to say. All right. Rise of dictatorial regimes. So we're going to talk about dictators and how these wonderful, kind, misunderstood. No, I'm kidding. Don't agree with that. They're not nice, wonderful people. They are bloodthirsty rulers who took over most of the world during a time when people couldn't do much to stop them. Okay? Sorry if I offended all of you pro-fascist dictators out there. All right. Starting off, so the rise of dictators. We've kind of led into, after World War One, most of Europe and parts of the world are kind of left in despair. By 1939, only France and Great Britain remained as democratic states in Europe, basically countries that use democracy. The quote unquote triumph of democracy after World War One was very short lived. Now, think about this for a second before we go to our next thing. Logically, and just kind of talking it out. After World War One, a lot of these nations, after the Treaty of Versailles, after we create peace, most of these nations are told slash forced by the League of Nations, hey, you're going to implement democracy. We're going to have freedom. Everyone's going to vote. Everyone's going to have a say. Now, fairly or unfairly, in the late 19 teens, early 1920s, most of Europe is going through a terrible, terrible economic depression. People are homeless, people are jobless, people are kind of at a loss. And their new rulers and presidents and people that are left in charge of these democracies aren't doing a whole lot to help them. There's not a lot they can do, but if you're a citizen in these nations, you're looking at them going, please help me, and nothing's getting done. So a lot of people living in places like Italy, the Soviet Union, Germany, places like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, places like Spain, Turkey are looking for some kind of leadership and they don't see it. So a lot of them turn to blaming democracy that was supposed to save them and doesn't. So once they kind of get out of this democratic idea of thinking, many of these states adopt what we call dictatorial regimes that took both old and new forms. Essentially, what those regimes look like are when you're going to put one person or one party and you're going to give a lot of power to them to hopefully be able to kind of assign jobs and roles and tasks to people to bring us out of this depression. And like we mentioned, I want you to focus on Italy, the Soviet Union, the USSR, aka Russia, and Germany. So, like we see here, just to put it in perspective, when we look at our map at the beginning, this is what our map looks like roughly in the early 1930s. It's not perfect right now, but it's a little bit different than World War One. We see a lot of new free nations. We see the Rhineland here is occupied by France. We see places like Czechoslovakia, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia are new nations. Most of this eastern bloc of Europe are all new freed nations, and even Turkey is an entirely new place with some of these new nations down here. They are all implementing new systems of government for the first time and looking to be led. We'll come back to this map at the very end, but it's basically going to break down near the end of the late 1930s what we have left as far as democratic states, authoritarian or totalitarian states, and otherwise. All right, the rise of dictators continued here. A dictatorial regime, in its simplest form, is when a nation is led by a single leader and a single party. So imagine if we lived in the United States and we just got rid of all parties except the Republican Party, or the Democratic Party was the only one left, or another party, the Green Party, the Independent Party, whatever it may be, where no one was able to run against them. They were unopposed as to who would be in charge. And those people will make the decisions for its citizens. There is no voting. There is no laws being passed by the greater good of the people. People are putting their belief and their faith in the government, in this one party and one leader to lead them. It's kind of the same idea as an emperor, as a king, as something along those lines. Now, forms of a dictatorship include things like fascism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism. Those are far more extreme versions of dictatorships, right? Where we see they will control not only the laws and things that are passed on a day to day basis, but like we mentioned, in a totalitarian state, from our opening question, they're going to control how the economy works, what businesses are allowed to be open, who works where, who's allowed to associate with who, what you are allowed to see through the media, what you read, what you watch, what books are allowed to be read. So this is when that power that is given to one people or a small group of people is really, in a way, it can be kind of abused, used to censor these people. Now, a modern day comparison. We don't have a ton of dictatorial regimes left. We don't have a lot of places like this. The closest thing, and one of the few places we have left, would be like the Workers' Party of Korea. And that is a political party which is led by Kim Jong un. and represents the nation of North Korea. His father, Kim Jong Il, was the leader, I guess, president, whatever you want to. I wish I could think of his title off the top of my head. I apologize. Prior to him, in North Korea, they live under this kind of law. Kim Jong Un is the one who decides what businesses will be opened, who will work where, what industries will be treated a certain way. Um, and he is the kind of supreme ruler of that place. Again, for reference sake, where I'm talking about North Korea, it is on the southeast border of China, not far away from Russia. And then obviously when we talk about Korea, we're going to see the separation of what was once a unified Korea split into North and South. North being under a totalitarian state and South Korea as a democracy. Okay. And there's a picture of our man with the best haircut of all time, Kim Jong. Maybe I'll go quarantine style. I haven't got a haircut in like 4 or 5 weeks, so I don't know. That looks like I could do that. I might go for it. All right, continuing. These new regimes pushed the central state's power far beyond what it had been in the past. Again, before we get too much further there, the people were for this. The people are realizing after World War I and during this depression, no matter what they're trying to do, they keep getting further into debt. There's no jobs opening up. There's no opportunity. People are starving on the streets. So the idea was, rather than try to come up with more of this electoral process and voting for things and having laws passed, which takes time and money and effort that we don't have, we're going to put that energy into the central state. We're going to give it to the government, essentially, and give it to these regimes. We trust that they have the best interest in mind. Okay, it says these regimes wanted to conquer the hearts and the minds of their subjects. I'm going to go back to our examples here. Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini. They are going to be very, very pro-nationalism. They are very, we can all equally agree they're all pretty terrible human beings and they've committed some horrible, horrible atrocities and crimes. But Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany, Stalin in Russia ultimately wanted to make their nation the best, strongest, most perfect version of itself they could. And they would do anything. They would give these very empowering speeches and discussions and talks to try to convince people, you should put me in charge. I have what's best in place here for Germany. I will do whatever it takes to make Italy as strong as possible. I will bring Russia to the top of the mountain. And they will try to win, like I said, their people's hearts, but also control what they do and don't see. They rejected the ideals of limited government power and the guarantee of individual freedom. The leader determined the collective will of the masses, aka what was good for people. And again, I will repeat, these dictators, your Stalins, your Hitlers, your Mussolinis, essentially went to the people and said, okay, fine, you can keep your individual freedom. We've had freedoms for the last 10, 15 years, and look where it's got us. You all have your freedom to do what you want, and we're struggling. People are starving. We aren't able to make products. We aren't able to trade and sell with the rest of the world. Germany specifically, remember, go back to the treaty and the punishment they had to pay. Hitler turns to his people and says, look what the rest of the world has done to us. They've blamed us for this world war. They've put us in a position we cannot get out of. How can we possibly change that? And they are preying on these people's fears and essentially telling them, we will get you back to what is best for us. Our first person to do this is Benito Mussolini, photoed right here, and basically is the first person to implement what he called fascism in Italy. As it says here, while Stalin was consolidating his power in the Soviet Union, Benito Mussolini was establishing a totalitarian regime in Italy. He seized power from King Emmanuel III during a coup d'etat. Remember, we've talked about a coup is a sudden and quick overthrow of the government. He takes advantage of high unemployment, inflation, and a middle-class fear of communism. People in Italy are worried and concerned after World War I. They see their nation as, we didn't get any land that we were promised. We have all these people who don't have jobs. We see the rise of communism in these different parts of the Eastern European scene. We need someone to stand up to this. And Benito Mussolini exploits all of these people's fears. He tells them, put me in charge, come with me, we will overthrow the king, and once we remove him, we will have our destiny in our own hands. In 1919, actually, it was this group he calls it the Fascio di Combattimento, and that was terrible Italian right there for you. And essentially, what it's called is the League of Combat. And that's what he deems his first fascist government of like, yes, you will give up some of your individual rights for right now. And that's how all these dictators start off, is saying, you're going to give up some rights now, but when we get to the very top, we will give them back to you. We will give the people their rights back, which is a nice promise until we realize that's not going to happen. And just to put in perspective, Italy, the boot, kicking the soccer ball. Sicily, no. Okay. You guys have seen the boot before, right? You guys all made fun of me when I made fun of the Mississippi River and the chef. This is the boot. It's how to remember what Italy looks like. As you guys can see, the fascist party was supported by people that lived in Italy. This wasn't an overthrow by one man who took a gun and said, I'm in charge now. He convinced and used the media and newspapers and radio to convince people that he and his party were right. And look at all the support that Benito Mussolini gets from the Italians. Which leads us to our next thing. We talked about it a little bit earlier in the week and last week, fascism. Fascism is a type of totalitarianism. It's a type of leadership that glorifies the state or the nation above everything else. The nation is more important than you, than your family, than your freedom, than your whatever it may be. It emphasizes the need for strong government that will lead and take that nation and make it as good as it possibly can be. And just so you guys can spell that, Benito Mussolini is the one who established the first European fascist movement. I know we all think of Hitler and the Nazis. These are actually, and if you guys are watching the World Wars like you should be, you're going to see Mussolini starts it, and Hitler looks kind of down, not too far away from Germany, seeing what's going on in Italy. He kind of looks up to Mussolini as like a little bit of an idol and says like, wow, look at how this guy did this. He used the media. He used his power. He's very convincing, persuasive, and he actually got the support of his people to put him in this power and give him the keys to the car. Mussolini gives very impassioned speeches about how democracy has failed, the Great Depression is upon us. We need to take basically our own leadership into our own hands. All right, I'll let you guys get this for a second. Sticking with Italy for a second here. The middle class people of Italy, okay, your average Joes, not your people that were living like kings or in the higher end echelon, or your people in poverty, right down the middle of the road, had three huge fears. They feared socialism, they feared communism, and they feared disorder. And basically, they look around at the rest of Europe as democracy has failed us. Communism is still not an effective way of ruling things. We see what's going on. We'll talk about Lenin and Stalin and the Russians here. And they basically look for any alternative, which makes those fascists seem pretty attractive. Not in that kind of way. Get your mind out of the gutter. In a way of like, this could be a government that gets us out of this. Even if, and again, a lot of Italians at the time thought, even if we give these people power temporarily, they'll help get us out of poverty, get us back to being a powerful nation, and then we will go back to a different type of government. Remember, many people in Italy were not happy. They come over to our side and fight along America, Britain, France, in World War I, and they are promised land. They are promised territory and money. And at the Treaty of Versailles, they're kind of left out in the cold. So Italy is looking for a way to kind of get itself back on top. Mussolini created a secret police force. Lots of extra S's there. He calls them the OVRA. And they are put in place to watch citizens, not only their political activities, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, who they are interacting with, and just kind of get a lay of the land as far as what's going on like a regular basis between the people of Italy. What are they looking for? What are they worried about? Before we jump to a conclusion, I just want to throw out there again, this is a form of fascism. Benito Mussolini and Italy never end up anywhere near as powerful or as much control over his people and the citizens as when we think about like the Nazis and Hitler. Hitler takes this idea of fascism that Italy implements and basically puts it on steroids and controls every waking thing you think about and do in Nazi Germany. If you are saying anything bad about the Nazis, talking poorly about the leaders, doubting any of those kind of things, you can be shot, killed, gassed, thrown in a concentration camp. Italy, like I'm sitting here trying to justify Italy and Mussolini. He's not that bad of a guy. Still not great, but none of those things were ever put in place. No concentration camps ever established in Italy. He was big on using propaganda, though, to control what information was out there and keep people convinced that his fascist party was doing a great job and providing Italy with jobs and relief. Again, just kind of reiterating one of our points we just said here, Italy after World War One, down here near the bottom, they have an insane amount of unemployment. They have people without jobs and people going hungry. Factory strikes, peasants seize the land. They are never given anything. They're never given what they were promised in World War One. They were essentially told Yugoslavia and this area down here in like the Baltic part of Europe, these will be yours. You will be given more land for your people, for industry, for everything. And like we mentioned, they had a very weak system of government. After World War One, there was all these different parties and systems and people that wanted to be in charge. So they kind of give way to this very strong-minded fascist leader like Mussolini. And just a little background here again, some more of his nickname, Il Duce. You do what you want with that information. You can either think that's a great nickname or a terrible nickname. It's up to you. Il Duce simply means the leader. And he really enjoyed going by this because having to just state that I am simply the leader and there is no other leaders made him very happy. And this is actually the fascist symbol up here. And you'll see that throughout this chapter, next chapter. If you watch World War II documentaries, it's worn by not only the Italians, but eventually adopted and taken by Hitler and the Nazis. And I'll let you guys read that quote there if you'd like to. Otherwise, you don't have to do so. All right, moving on. Our next part we're going to get into is a new era in the USSR. Back in the USSR. That's a Beatles song, so I can sing all I want. You can't stop me. There's nothing you can do right now. Let's go ahead and get started. In 1922, our friend, our leader, our guy that we have talked about, Vladimir Lenin, and the communists formally create a new state called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. And this is what they decide to deem what was once known as Russia, and spoiler alert, what will be called Russia again. We'll show you a little map here explaining. Essentially, he had broken down the nation into a small amount of group of republics that all ruled under Lenin. Lenin eventually passes away and dies, leaving this power vacuum. Who is going to take over this new nation that is born of the USSR? And it essentially comes down to two people. A guy named Leon Trotsky, right here as we see his name, and another guy by the name of Joseph Stalin. Trotsky wanted to launch Russia on a path of rapid industrialization and to spread communism abroad. So he basically sees this as, what we're doing is great. We need to take it and push it out to other places and try to convince as many people around the world that this is a great thing that we have here. I put in parentheses, at the expense of peasants. Because when you're mass producing things and making more and more and more than you ever have, or you ever thought you could, this is going to come at the expense of, like, people are going to work 12, 14, 16, 20-hour days. People are going to work even when they're sick. People are going to work essentially till they die. A couple of things before we move on. Russia under Lenin, the people of the USSR became known as the Soviet people. Name indicated that the Soviets or revolutionary councils now held the power. He was very adamant about we don't want to be Russia anymore. We want to have our own name. This is no longer run by the Russians. It is now what was left over as the Soviets, the former Bolshevik Revolution. This is our nation now. And as you can see, again, it's really hard to see, but you guys, you got the Google machine. You can Google it. The USSR was divided into separate political republics joined in a federal union. Sounds a lot like states in our country, right? Eventually, the USSR included 15 of these republics. And this is Lenin in his casket after he's passed away, and Lenin leading the Soviet people. Another group, rather than what Trotsky said, another group wanted to focus on building a socialist state in Russia. And one of those people that felt strongly about building that socialist state in Russia and growing them to this kind of superpower type country was a party general secretary named Joseph Stalin. Now, you're going to see in our episode of the World Wars, when Lenin takes over Russia, he takes Stalin kind of under his wing as his protege and shows him a lot of his views on what socialism is and how it should become communism, and how communism will become even more kind of extreme and taken to a point it's never gone before. Stalin, this position that he had under Lenin, this party general secretary, um, that ended up being very consequential for him. He was in charge, because of this job, of appointing people to become regional, district, city, and town officials. So Stalin had the last say on who was going to be given these power in these different parts of the Soviet Union. He uses this to essentially tell people, hey, if you make sure to put me in charge and kind of replace Lenin with me instead of Trotsky, I will make you the regional ruler or the district ruler or the mayor of a city or a town. And it's pretty simple. When you're given power, you're going to get power. And Stalin is kind of able to bribe his way to becoming the ruler of the Soviet Union. Stalin's control over Russia meant that freedom was the one thing that people lost. Artists painted pictures glorifying Stalin, and he dominated many of these photos, whether it be in the press, whether it be in newspapers or magazines, or just artwork that was around Red Square. He literally names a city Stalingrad after himself. And that's not the first time one of these Soviet rulers has done that. It used to be called Leningrad. I wonder who that one was named after. He gave himself the nickname Uncle Joe. Nothing like telling people to work or else they're going to get sent off to Siberia and die. So you got to give yourself a cushy nickname to like soften the blow. He calls himself Uncle Joe, which was an attempt to develop a nice image of a kind, homely man who was the father of all Russians. So just a little bit there about Stalin. However, the country did become a major industrial nation by 1939, and I like to say her progress. We're calling a nation, you're giving it gender at this point. But saying the USSR had progressed was unmatched in the era of the Depression in America and Western Europe, where millions were unemployed. So the methods of how he was getting this done, which we'll talk about in a second, Stalin was making people work, making people build things and create things and work. If they decided not to work, they were killed. If they weren't killed, they were sent off to a place called Siberia to work in work camps. Now, you can't argue with results, is essentially what he's saying, is despite people dying and people being sick, the Soviet Union thrives. It starts to make things and build things and become that industrial superpower Stalin wanted it to be. And he can still point across the pond and go, look at America right now in the 30s. They have democracy and freedom, which you guys all want, and they're in the Great Depression. They have nothing. There's nothing going well for them right now. People had access to better health care in the 10 years before the National Health Service was introduced in Great Britain. So Stalin does try to point out a lot of the good things about what's going on in the Soviet Union. He does leave out all of the torture and sadness and disease and dying. Easy to do. He is going to implement this thing, which you guys have as one of your vocab words, called collectivization. That collectivization is a system in which private farms were eliminated. Instead, rather than having farmers use their own farms to make their own crops to make their own money, the government comes in, and the Soviet Union's government owns all the land. It owns all of the crops, all of the animals, all of the things that are grown and made, and it employs the people to go work on these farms. And within it states saying, if you all work really hard and do your job and put your nation and your state first, if you work, ultimately that's a good thing. The more we all work as a collective, the more we will make and more we will produce, the more we will sell. and the more we can then make money off it, and you guys will all succeed. If you work hard, it will come back to you. Part of the problem there is that people were being forced to do things they didn't know they weren't good at. People had to be forced to work when they were sick, when they were old, when they were dying. And there was any of these, if you would try to not work or stand up against that, like I said, you were killed or exiled. And this is where we come up with, by the way, if you guys haven't seen the symbol that goes into the Soviet flag, we have this thing called the sickle, which is used to cut down and harvest different types of crops and wheat and farms, which is talking about the collectivization. And the other thing we see here is a hammer for the industrial might, things that are being built. With that being said, you can see all the different areas of collectivization where he's making workers farm and grow and produce things. Also on these red dots, you're going to see this is a map of the location of labor camps. We call them labor camps because concentration camps has a really, really bad connotation to it. And again, as we see, this area of northeastern Russia is called Siberia. And we see a handful of these red dots up here to keep people as far away as possible. Even if they escape these labor camps, they would have to be out in the frozen tundra in one of the coldest areas of the world where there's bears and tigers. Oh my. Okay. All right, last couple questions here, and then we're almost done for the day. Thank you for bearing with me. Authoritarian states in the West. A number of governments in the Western world were not totalitarian states, where they had total control of what goes on in places like Italy and the Soviet Union, but were rather authoritarian. One of the best examples of these, and again, we think of West meaning America, I'm talking West as in Western Europe. One of the best examples of this would be General Francisco Franco, who led Spanish military forces in a revolt against their democratic government in 1936. Another coup d'etat, another revolution. And after a 3-year civil war in Spain, Franco wins. He is supported, by the way. We're going to show some pictures of Franco in a second. He receives a lot of military aid, resources, food, whatever it may be, from Benito Mussolini of Italy and Adolf Hitler of Germany. And there's a picture of Francisco Franco. Anybody with that kind of coat thinks he is clearly killing it. And as you can see, he quite literally idolized and looked up to other very powerful, quote unquote, successful leaders at the time, like Hitler. Just taking that mustache and rolling with it. So that's a picture there of Hitler and Franco together. And here you can see the revolution, the civil war going on in Spain. I bring that map from the beginning back up to show you what Europe will look like very, very quickly. So in a matter of less than 20 years, World War I ends in 1918. After the war ends, we put all these nations into what we think is democracy, freedom. It will help unify and bring everything together. The League of Nations will help organize and run Europe and keep things together. Not even 20 years later, the yellow countries have quote unquote democratic regimes. And that's essentially what's left of Great Britain, most of France, part of Spain, and Scandinavia up here, with Czechoslovakia being the lone, and Switzerland, as always, neutral Switzerland. But we see not very much yellow for something that was supposed to unite and create democracy around all of Europe. Our dark red burgundy, rhyme Ron Burgundy, color is our fascist dictators, Franco, Hitler, Mussolini. Are royal dictatorships. So essentially dictators, but still being run through the facade of kings, princes, whatever it may be. We see places like Yugoslavia and in the Baltic parts of Europe. Presidential dictatorships. So where we got to pretend and have kind of a quote unquote election, if you will, but the votes as they were put in place were going to be for certain people, and then these dictators were going to be put in charge. Austria, Hungary, Poland, areas of this part, and then the USSR and these communist nations over here. So not quite the same as we thought it was going to be. All right, That's it for today. Thank you guys for bearing with me. You guys have been doing an awesome job. I know you guys have a lot going on. You're getting a lot of work. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you guys doing this, listening, doing your notes, doing your work. You guys are rock stars. Okay. We only have a few weeks of this left, 4 or 5 weeks hopefully left. And then we can get back to some sense of normalcy. That's your notes for the day. I'm going to post your Flocab assignment on here. Get that done sometime in the next 2 or 3 days. And then that's pretty much it for us. All right. I will see you guys later. I'll talk to you later. If you guys have questions or something, please let me know.